And from this German village, Jews were sent to the Holocaust. Here was a powerful Nazi stronghold. Now, 50 years later, to make amends, the town invited survivors back, triggering memories too painful to hold.
If I speak about it, I think about it, and I do not want to think about it.
And an encounter they'll never forget. Holocaust survivors meet Germany's youth.
My grandparents usually say, I didn't know anything about it. I didn't know anything.
Bob Brown reports, tomorrow's Germany meets the children of yesterday.
And that encounter is quite a moment, with a powerful message for this extraordinary season. Throughout Eastern Europe, freedom rising. In East Germany, the crumbling of the Berlin Wall. And just this week, for the first time, West Germany's Chancellor Helmut Kohl speaking publicly about the reunification of the two Germanys.
And surely that will come up this weekend when President Bush meets with Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev. Of course, the very idea of a single German state sends shockwaves wide and deep. It scares many people in Europe and around the world. The Nazi past still haunts Germany as well, and it's wrestling with that in many different ways. So tonight we go on a dramatic voyage with Bob Brown and survivors of Nazi Germany who returned to their hometown, so different today from 50 years ago.
It was once a collection of villages in Germany west of the Rhine, and now it is a town named Munchengladbach. The children here have grown up knowing good, peaceful times, schooled in the folklore and heritage of the region that is their native home. These are the children of Munchengladbach today. These are the children of yesterday, who knew neither peace nor comfort. They grew up in this area before World War II, members of a Jewish community who were driven forever from Munchengladbach into exile or concentration camps, separated from families that were decimated by death. In an effort to acknowledge its role in that unforgivable past, the town of Munchengladbach traced these survivors to cities around the world. And at the town's expense, they have been brought back to visit their childhood homes once again. This is a story about that bittersweet return, and about 2 of the 170 survivors who accepted the invitation to come back.
Oh, that's the kind of Führerschaft. We used this down there. That's street. Bismarckstraße.
Laura and Eric Brook of San Diego, California.
We came with an open mind. When we got the invitation, we talked about it. Do we want to accept it? Do we want to go? Do we want to have the emotional upheaval? And
Eric Brook escaped Germany but lost 19 members of his family in the Holocaust. His wife Laura did not escape and has spent a lifetime haunted by memories of concentration camps.
You don't talk a lot about what happened to you.
I do not. It's too painful for me to speak about it. And if I speak about it, I think about it, and I do not want to think about it. I mean, it was just too horrendous. But you can try to live with it. You have to live with it.
Despite an atmosphere of excitement, many of the returnees, like Laura, had to overcome deep emotional wounds to be here. And as they were brought together formally at a reception in one of the town halls, their memories began to stir again. Many were seeing each other for the first time since they were children. Many brought photographs they had fled with a half-century ago, and Laura discovered this photo of herself as a young girl. She also found an old class photo that included her brother, who died in the Holocaust. These were photos from a time when swastikas were hanging over the main street of Munchengladbach. This area was a bastion of Nazi strength before the war, giving the party one of its first major local victories in 1933. After that, virtually all cultural activities and celebrations were used for Nazi indoctrination. This anti-Semitic propaganda is now part of a public exhibit the town has set up to take an unflinching look at its past. This is a Star of David that Jews were required to wear on their clothes. And most chilling of all, there is this chart showing the route of every Jewish citizen who was deported from Munchengladbach into the ghettos and concentration camps. Each black line represents a Jew who died at one of those destinations.
It's getting to me.
Laura Brooke and her family were among those who were herded from their homes till not a Jew was left in Munchengladbach. Their deportation took them first to the Lodz ghetto in Poland.
We walked quite a few miles with our suitcases, and they put us into a school building, into different classrooms. And in one classroom where maybe 60, 70 people, they kept the families together. And we were lying on the floor for 9 months next to each other, women, men, children. We got one plate of soup, a piece of bread, and it was freezing. Poland is freezing, now heat.
You and your mother survived.
Yes, my father died in August 42. In August 42, he died of hunger. And he stayed with us in the room for 3 days because there was so many people died that they were not able to pick them up. So, and I don't even know where he's buried. They just picked up the people, and he's buried someplace in Poland. I have no idea where.
And your brother?
And then in August 44, they liquidated the ghetto. And my brother, unfortunately, at that time had typhoid. And when we got to Auschwitz, they separated men and women anyway. But since he was very sick, I'm sure he went into the ovens right away. He was 19 years old.
Were you constantly afraid of death?
Yes.
Or you were?
Yes.
It never left you?
No.
From the moment you were taken from Munchengladbach?
Yes. You see, before we were taken from Mönchengladbach, when we got the notice, my mother was the only one who realized what was in store for us. And she talked to us for 1 week. She wanted us to commit suicide, all 4 of us. She wanted us to take pills and turn on the gas. And neither my father, my brother, or I were willing to do that. We also didn't realize what, I mean, we could, how can anybody imagine that a thing like this could happen?
Herzlich willkommen in Ihrer Vaterstadt Mönchengladbach.
Finally came the moment with the words in German, "Welcome to your hometown." The current mayor of Mönchengladbach, who was a young boy during the war, stood to speak for the town, stood and looked into a sea of memories like Laura Brooke's, and was for a moment overcome.
Unter der nationalsozialistischen Herrschaft gedemütigt hat, sich verdrängte, verfolgte.
You have returned here to a place where under the National Socialist rulers you have been humiliated, persecuted and banished, where the road to suffering began for you, your relatives and friends, and which led to such tragedy for many.
He touched me, really touched me. That was, I think, the turning point in all our feelings, because I've never heard a speech where any German admitted that he was ashamed of what had happened. See, that was the whole point about after the war, that nobody admitted anything. Nobody admitted it happened. Nobody admitted that he was a Nazi. Nobody admitted that they knew. And it had to be, 6 million people couldn't have been eliminated without anybody knowing. A person can disappear, 2 people can disappear, but not 6 million without anybody knowing.
To seek the graves of relatives they had not been able to honor since being driven from Mönchengladbach, the Brookes went to a local cemetery on a morning halfway through their stay. With them was Eric's brother, Max. When the family was scattered during the Holocaust, Max had wound up on a ship to Australia, where he now lives. He brought his Australian-born daughter back for this visit, and he translated for her the words in German on this Holocaust memorial in a corner of the cemetery.
And the Eternal said to Cain, "What have you done?" And the voice of blood of your brothers cries out to me from the earth. It was a quotation from Cain and Abel. What have you done to your brother?
In a small community center in Munchengladbach, the returnees went for services. It was the first time so many had prayed together here since the Holocaust. The town synagogues that most remembered from their childhood had been burned down by the Nazis. Equally painful to Eric Brook and his brother Max was what had been left standing, the house where they grew up.
Were your bedrooms in the front or the back?
My bedroom was in the back.
That's changed. The canopy wasn't there.
No.
This was the last place they saw their family before they fled Germany as young men. From here, their sister and parents were taken to the concentration camps where they died.
I know we stood here.
I know my mother used to come out here and call us and say, "Come in to eat," and things like that. That I remember, but if I talk about it, I get too emotional. I don't want to talk about it. Over the years, you learn to control it, because if you get upset every time, you're a nervous wreck.
And besides, we become more tolerant as we get older. And after all, this generation really is not responsible for the other generation. Then they should not pay for the sins, but they should know what has happened, and we should never forget what happened.
Speaking with the new generation was also part of the purpose of their trip. The survivors were divided into groups to talk with young people in the Munchengladbach school system. And Eric and Laura met with this high school class.
In Hitler Mein Kampf sagt es, der Jude
It was an emotionally charged discussion, not only because of the memories that were recounted, but because the students seemed anxious to unburden themselves.
The Holocaust and the Nazi era are often topics on the curriculum, while we rarely learn anything about that from our grandparents. They do talk about the war, but this topic of the Holocaust is usually left out.
My grandparents usually say, "I didn't know anything about it. I didn't know anything." But when you ask them, well, but you must have noticed something about how the Jews were being arrested one by one in the houses next door and shipped away someplace, and then this whole big problem of repression starts.
As for me, personally, I was scared of our first conversation. I was afraid that someone would tell me, "You're a German, therefore you're a murderer." I didn't know what you or what I would answer to that.
None of us would say such a thing to you, because we all know that it's another generation entirely. I said it before, you can't make the children responsible for the sins of their fathers.
That's why I said that 20 years ago, we couldn't have come here. All those people would still have been alive, or many of them would have been alive. People we could have asked, were you one of those guys who pushed us into the gas chamber or pulled the trigger to shoot us? You have got to tell yourself that what happened must never ever happen again. And only young people can do that. The young people are the future.
It was the contrast between those futures that exist and the futures that were scattered to the winds that kept coming back as a theme when the 170 former residents were taken on a river tour through the countryside they once knew along the Rhine.
And this is now somehow just a memory. When you see old friends, you're very happy. when you see old places that you knew as a child and they are no longer there, especially the synagogue, then you're very, very sad. So it changes from moment to moment. But it's good to see old friends.
We will remember this for a long time.
Remember this for a long time, and I'm very happy that we came because we saw the genuine outpour of friendliness.
You know, there will be many people who will think that what happened was so unforgivable that no one should have come here, should have accepted hospitality.
There are people who still think this, but after I've seen how they received us here, I must say that those people missed something, because it was a genuine outpouring of feeling for us, and they really showed genuinely that they were sorry for what had happened.
Could you ever live here again?
No. No way.
Too many bitter memories.
Too
we would live with our memories. When we were near the house where we lived, I see my parents walking there, so I couldn't live with that. That would be emotionally impossible. I see my mother, I see my father, I see my sister, and that would never go away. I would have it every day to remind me of what has been, and that's not a way to live. We have a new life, and that's our life now. There can't be another country anymore. The United States, that's it.
That's our home.
Bob, and you know, I look at this and I think that there are still some people who say, the Holocaust, it never happened. One of the things that's troubling with the emergence of freedom now in these Eastern European countries, there's also, I've been reading about, an emergence of anti-Semitism. Now that you can express yourself freely and write freely, this is coming out.
That's one of the ironic results of it. And again, one of the purposes of this trip was to try to overcome some of those feelings. As you saw, many of the children felt that they hadn't been told the truth, and these people were brought back to witness what had happened to them and to make sure that the next generation knows about it and has heard it.
And when someone says to these children it never happened, they can say, yes, it did. I met the people it happened to. A remarkable story. You must have been very moved by it.
Very moved. Well, later, this is a real eye-opener, deadly side effects from one of the most used prescription drugs. Dr. Timothy Johnson will have that. But first,